Well, Doubts Aloud listeners, we are back as promised with our second Miracles show. It kind of reminds me in the Gospel of John, there's a theme of so-called 7 signs, 7 miracle signs. This is our second show. We're not going to do that many, so you'll be okay there. But yeah, we're back with the second one, continuing on, if you followed last month's one on miracles, we're doing miracles number 2. And so we're going to actually just start the ball rolling straight away on this subject. And so Ed and Francis, welcome back.
Hi.
Hello.
So Ed, tell us what's in store for this episode.
Well, we're going to keep going with the second sort of theme we were doing on miracles from last time, and that is trying to have a bit of an overview of all of the kind of things to observe in the world around the whole topic of miracles. And then we've got, we hope, a good dip into my 50 Arguments for God book, which has a chapter on miracles in the Gospels.
Okay, so can you just do, perhaps for anyone that's just going to start listening to this one, they'll probably go back and listen to the other one, but just an overview from either of you on last month's discussion on miracles in the context?
Well, we last month we looked at some miracles that had been put forward by lee-strobel, and we discussed those and why we didn't feel any of them were quite enough to change our view, and that was something that it was a lot easier to do in some of the miracles than others. I mean, there was one miracle that we looked at, a healing miracle, which was quite impressive, but otherwise I think it's fair to say we were not impressed by the lee-strobel list.
It sounds like you're saying we are not amused.
Yes.
We're not, certainly
Well,
not.
the thing was, I think we were quite, on some occasions,
Actually,
we were quite amused.
You're right. That's not the right way to do it. I think it was amusing. You're right, Ed. So, Ed, some of your comments on last month's episode.
Yeah, so something we did sort of bypass from the lee-strobel talk was this book by Gunther Brown. I believe she's not a Christian and an atheist. And she did some research in Madagascar or somewhere like that, and somewhere in South America, on kind of miracles in the field. And we kind of skipped over it a bit, but mostly because none of us had read it or could see almost no information at all on it. So what we're thinking of doing is getting hold of the book and then picking up on it in our next episode.
And should we say that we're hoping to have a guest on our next episode?
Who has indeed read it.
That's right. I don't want to introduce any spoilers, but I think that's our news, that we've had contact from somebody who we mentioned in the last show.
Robert White.
That's right. I thought I'd leave it to you because I keep getting people's names wrong, and I don't want to get his name wrong again.
Last month it was like he was confusing with Andrew. You said, I don't know, whatever it was.
Yes,
it was me, wasn't it?
I'm always like this. I'm just all over the place with names. Anyway, so I thought I'd leave that one to you, Ed, because you're much
I sensed you were floundering. So he's reached out to us and is keen to be our guest, and we've responded, but that's as far as we've got. So we're excited about that. It's one of his real big things is miracles, and he is a Christian apologist of the kind we like. Can we put it that way?
Yes. Okay, fair enough. We'll have to.
So he's
have some on the kind we don't like.
Through. It's not all bombastic, all that sort of stuff.
Fair enough. And also, last month's episode, of course, was based on a virtual guest, which was by the email from Christian, and we had little response from Christian. If you read that, I did.
Yes, I did. I don't have it open in front of me at the moment. I don't know
the gist or the kernel?
The gist was that he had enjoyed the programme, that he was still, I think, wanted to push back on some of the miracles, and was still felt that we had more research to do on that. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think mostly the Gunther Brown book, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's a very fascinating one for me to think that the miracles is a last holdout sort of thing for all kinds of issues. It really wasn't my story. It was pretty easy to put into context for my story that actually I wasn't persuaded by much that I was heard that was taught around miracles or saw. But you could say, well, perhaps I should have been hanging around the third world a lot more, because that's where the stories came from of any note. And
Yes.
I suppose I didn't. You could say, well, have you personally sought out the stories and gone in a plane and interviewed people? Well, no, but some people have done that sort of thing and still haven't come up with much. And so I would always be open to say, well, this is just cannot be explained outside of Christ. So that would be where I would be. I would be open to say, look, there's no. I would like to know the truth about the world, not sort of just hide and push truth away. So yeah, that's why we're doing this podcast, I suppose.
Yeah, I think another way we could put it is to say this time particularly we're going to look at the telescope from the other end. So instead of the best shot miracles being presented to us and us having to sort of bat them away, as it were.
Yeah.
We're saying, okay, let's now just look at the whole picture of kind of like, I put it as like miracles as they are out in the field, which is a kind of research term, field study rather than lab study. And we did start doing that last time. We looked first at the very gung-ho promises in the New Testament regarding miracles, that if you get sick, you go to the elders and they'll pray for you and you'll get better, that kind of thing. And in the Gospels, of course, Jesus heals everybody, and there's lots of promises of, you'll do greater things than me, and anything you ask in my name will be granted, all sorts of stuff. So that was one of our points. Yeah. Then we looked at the actual reality of what happens in churches when people get ill, which does not speak well for miracles. And then we talked about Darren Brown and the way that he could reproduce what seemed to be a kind of Christian healing meeting with equally remarkable results, or which was very impressive. It was something on Netflix, and it's all referred to in the show notes from last time.
We were going to talk about the lack of evidence for miracles, given the potential that is available in the modern world with mobile phone videos and all the things that you can capture on those, and that you would expect that God would help his followers by assisting them to make use of this ability to show incontrovertibly things, extraordinary events like limbs growing back, or people being completely healed, people who have medically attested issues that are then miraculously and immediately healed, and that we just don't see the evidence of that. I don't know if either of you are aware of any evidence of that sort.
Well, there is actually on YouTube a whole raft of people that try to do this. So I remember some years ago seeing lots of stuff. Again, it's coming from what you would expect. It's coming from the charismatic side of the church, even in Catholic churches, but mainly sort of Pentecostal, where the theology is that these things do happen today in the world. But the videos, when you look at them closely, the ones I've seen, you get a lot of the other one that's probably more it's in the same thing, but not so much healing miracles, but demon possession, and therefore expulsion of demons. Now they're quite interesting to watch, and one has to have different ideas perhaps on what that is if it's not what they're saying it is. But when it comes to healings, even the videos where they're all praising God and they're believing stuff, you don't actually know the full. You can't necessarily see what's happening necessarily. Somebody claims something from a distance in the video or something. So even the videos are subject to sort of questioning. Back to particularly when it's a believing audience that's so massive and noisy. You don't know if the person well, it ties into this other thing as well, that some people apparently can step out of a wheelchair with this great big euphoria, and then as soon as it's all over, they just fall back into it again, and so if you captured them for a moment, you need to do research on what's possible in that realm rather than praise God they're healed for life. So all of this mixes up when you see anything on a video, and so some of the ones I've seen critically looked at haven't been that impressive. And legs growing, of course, is you can have this thing where you actually do have the feet, it's a very common thing. I don't know if you've seen
it. Well, that's a well-known con, isn't it?
It's a well-known con,
Yeah. What we want is a genuine leg growing, which
yes, that's
of course on camera, where someone literally has a stump and then you can see it miraculously.
What Ed is a miracle.
Yes. Or a small finger growing.
Let's start.
That's one of your experts. I remember that makes me think of you, Francis. We'll come on to that, I guess.
I mean, I just wanted to say that the closest I've seen, perhaps isn't quite the right word, but the closest I've come across to that is an audio tape of Dwayne Miller, and I've Googled that name, so I know I've got it right, who was a preacher and lost... I don't know, it sounded like he had terrible laryngitis, but apparently he lost his voice, and although he could speak, he apparently was in pain, and his voice was really, really bad. And there is a tape of his voice recovering as he preaches on God healing. Anyway, I'll perhaps forward it to you, and you can put it in the show notes.
I think it is already from last time. It was at the end of the lee-strobel, wasn't it?
I don't remember lee-strobel covering Dwayne Miller, but okay, if it's in the lee-strobel, then apologies for introducing it as if it's something new. It was
we need some healing of the memories, I say.
Yes.
Yeah, that used to be a thing in the church, healing of the memories.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, that sounds very Stalinist, doesn't it?
Yes. That's right.
I thought it was just Barbara Snyder was what he had, but anyway, we'll check that out and maybe add it if it isn't already there. And that's something that it's interesting to listen to. I would recommend people go and listen to that.
Yeah.
To make their minds
right
up.
at the end. On the thing of videos, you would have thought, when video cameras suddenly came out and everyone had one in their pocket, and these amazing miracles were happening in the outer beyond. And of course, these days, mobile phones in Africa are not as, they're ubiquitous. And they have caught up with camera phones maybe a few years after the West, but still there's plenty there.
Yeah.
And so
everyone's got mobile phones everywhere now.
Yeah, that's right. So you would expect if there was all these miracles happening out there that we don't hear about, and yet there hasn't been loads of these wonderful miracles shown on the camera phones.
Yeah.
So I kind of tease a bit that God's about to miss the boat here, because the technology for editing, like photoshopping, whatever that would be called, with a video, is there to enable skeptics just to dismiss any video that's
exactly. So I mean, there's loads of UFO ones now that have all been just, you can show that it's been edited in this kind of software with this effect and this background, and so now we're in an age where you could capture things live, but actually you now fabricate them anyway, so you actually cancel out. So videos are left to doubt as opposed to actually convince. So it's like, you can't win. Yes, you're right.
So God's window of opportunity was quite short, and it's closing fast.
It's gone with Photoshop and editing software. Yes. So you could have Jesus ascending now on a video, and you could say, well, that's done in Photoshop over the weekend. So it's like or an equivalent sort of thing.
Yeah. So a couple of things on this list of kind of miracles out in the field. One is that they do tend to take place in these rally-type meetings of the kind that Darren Brown could reproduce. They don't, it's not like a ward in the hospital where you go and get prayed for and you're healed. You don't get miracles where the sick are. You get them in these rallies.
Yeah,
is that fair?
Yeah. Yes, where there's this very febrile atmosphere as well, which is likely to feed into.
And then another thing to throw, we all know, but is worth pointing out, is that these rallies, a lot of them are riddled with dishonesty. Peter Popoff, for example, was famously exposed by the amazing Randel.
James Randy.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah,
yes,
that's right.
Decades ago, and then there was a thing on the Benny Hinn where the people went behind the scenes and discovered that anyone who's genuinely ill was kept miles away from the stage, and only people who could be kind of worked on in a way that looked impressive were allowed on the stage.
Infused in the moment. The Popoff one was a famous one of people interviewing them when they were queuing up to go in with their illness and addresses and everything else. And of course, it all went to the wife, and then it went across the radio to his earpiece. And then you got the kind of like, instead of like, I always sort of like joke, it's a bit like, if you're in Australia in a rally, you say, "Is there anyone here called Bruce?" And with a bad back, and of course you're bound to hit the mark with that sort of thing, isn't there? Or is there a Shayla here? But so that's fine. But if you go the Popoff way, it was like, Mary Steenberg from 14 Alloway Avenue, and it's me, and of course they've got the details in the interview. So when you get that specific, you either think, gosh, this is God, or it's an interview prior to the thing. And of course they got it all caught,
I mean, it's is there anyone here called Bruce is cold reading?
Yes,
and
that's right.
Finding out from the interview is called hot reading.
Right, there you go. Well, that's
okay.
well put, Francis. I like it. I like it. You could have summed that up and said, well, there's hot reading and cold reading. There you have it.
I think we do need to be a little bit clear here, because just because we can find false, dishonest, fake healings, that doesn't mean we're claiming that thereby all healings are fake,
and certainly not all dishonest. I mean, even if the healings are fake, it doesn't mean that the person doing them is dishonest.
Absolutely not.
Because people persuade themselves. They think they have a genuine gift from God. People can unconsciously carry out cold readings. I mean, a hot reading, no, you know you're being dishonest. But but cold reading is a technique, and people can just pick up on it, and they
don't know they're doing it.
Yeah, they don't know they're doing it, and they think they're getting all this fantastic, success rate, and that it's the work of God or the Holy Spirit, and it's just them using some inner skills that they've developed.
Yeah, pattern matching.
And also, though, Ed, your point earlier is that God is sort of unfortunately made a world in which there's, even if there was the true healings, just for argument's sake, 1 out of 1,000 is genuinely God healing. You've got to wade through the fakes, the Christian fakes, the people that are doing it or believing something, but they've only heard a rumor. You've got to wade through all of that, which actually doesn't make it very simple to say, here's clear healing and here's not. You have to do a lot of work, and so it's easy to disbelieve or it's easy to believe. I mean, Christians, easy believism is so, I've seen it in crowds, so easy to just hear a story and they all go praise God and they haven't thought for 1 minute about checking it.
No.
Yes, Oh, we're all the same.
Well,
so
that's true.
Some terrible story about Trump, I'm going to believe it. I won't.
Yes.
Yeah, it's confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias. So yes, you're right. And so therefore the research approach and critical thinking is really the model, as opposed to just for anything, just believing it. I suppose it's a danger in belief. There was a story. I was at have you been to New Wine? No, sorry, not Francis. You wouldn't have been, but Ed,
I've been to New Wine.
Why? I went to New Wine, and about 12 years ago, a friend invited it. I'd been to Minehead. Now, Francis, I'm not sure if you're aware of these kind of Christian meetings. Greenbelt is very, 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 very different. But these
you've mentioned Greenbelt.
That's very liberal Christian, whereas the more fundamentalist or charismatic or evangelical are these other ones in the country. And I was invited by a friend to go. I was a bit skeptical myself because I was on my doubting journey even then, very much so. And anyway, they did this story, and there was 2 leaders doing this story about 2 children that had been locked in a tomb somewhere in Europe. And ironically, for about 3 days. And when they found out what had happened and they unlocked them and let them out, the kids said, "Oh, it's all right, Mummy. Jesus was here holding us and appeared to us." Now, this story was told to New Wine, people praying, "Praise God." And they said, "Let's all thank the Lord." And I was sitting there aghast you just heard a story that sounds a bit silly, and everyone is praising the Lord already. And then I went and researched it, and apparently it's an old sort of urban legend Christian story from the 80s that had just been rejuvenated. And that was just with my research. And I said to Teresa next to me, I said, I don't believe this for a second. And then when I researched it, it was completely, even in Christian articles, debunked, you know.
Right.
And yet all these people said, praise God. That's the problem, I think, with belief.
Yeah.
You know?
Can I throw in another problem?
Yes.
That's the placebo effect.
Yeah.
So just taking, as we all know, just taking the medicine, thinking it might make you better, has a really powerful impact. Now, I think it's disputed if it's all in the mind, and so you just feel you're a bit better, and we'll fill in a survey form to say you're improved, or if it actually is mind over matter as well, and genuinely it impacts the physiology. I don't know what the latest is on that, but still, when we're talking about reports of miracles and reports of people getting better, I would have thought having faith, which is what is the key step that you're expected to do, to believe you're going to get better. It's not when you take medicine, you think, well, you might, but if you've got full faith, you believe you will get better, surely that would be a much more powerful effect even than the placebo effect.
Yes, and there's going to be incredible pressure on you to say you feel better and to perceive yourself as feeling better, because otherwise you feel you're sort of you're lacking faith, you know, and that you're letting the side down. So, I mean, that's bound to have some effect.
Yeah.
Wasn't there some studies in prayer based on that very point, Ed, in the sense that there were some people said in some statistical prayer thing that they knew that they were being prayed for, others were being prayed for, and they didn't know they were being prayed for, and others weren't being prayed for at all for healing.
I've heard that one.
And I think I'd heard, again, this is where I need to do my research, but I think I'd heard that those that felt that they were being prayed for did feel better, and that could be due to the placebo of that, or even the pressure point of view. You know, imagine that.
No, I think it was the opposite, sadly. It's undermining
was
my
it?
point. Yeah.
Oh, right. In that, well, maybe there's been different ones done. But here's the thing to do. We can both do some research on that, actually. So there's an example for you. We can come back with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I've not checked it, but one thing I've been told,
Yeah.
I think from the Robert White, actually.
We need to check this, Ed.
That in that famous experiment where there was no impact of anybody getting better, it was undermined because the Christians they got doing the praying weren't sort of Pentecostal enough. So they didn't.
But I mean,
enough.
How would you objectively assess whether somebody was Pentecostal or not?
Well, that's my word. I forget what the exact terminology was.
Oh, okay.
But you know, they weren't believing enough. They were maybe they were more what I call my Radio 4 Christians who pray for world peace every week without expecting anything else.
Yes, the sort that would go to hospital, they would go to A&E and not to a prayer room if you had the choice. Yes, that's right.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So that's the placebo effect, and I don't think it's anywhere else in our notes. When they do surveys of Christians of the Pentecostal charismatic ilk, very large numbers do report having miracles in their lives. So it's not that there's no, the reports of miracles are rare. It's just that people have things happen to them, and they assign it to God, and so they say, yes, I've had a miracle happen to me.
But that's assigning, isn't it? It's often subjective. We've had some stories last month on this where it looks like something quite similar could happen in the secular life with no assumption of God or belief in God, and something rather amazing happens, but you don't put all the language to it, and Jesus isn't the answer to it or the organizer of it. And so that's where this comes in, this aspect, Ed, I would say.
Yeah.
Anecdotal personal stories. I know that I know it's God, someone might say.
Yeah. So the next one, I think, Francis, you'll be interested in because it came up very much when you were on Unbelievable talking to Mr. Fish about his healing ministry. And that is the way that when these healings do seem to occur, and they're used as examples, and we all look in the medical records or whatever, the it just seems so random. It doesn't seem to be a reason why God healed this person and ignored that person.
Yeah. Yes.
I was thinking particularly of the story that you discussed with Mr. Fish over a woman whose womb was saved.
Yes, that was really quite strange. Have we put the link to Unbelievable in the show notes?
I will make sure,
because I can't go. It was quite complicated. I can't go through it all now. But there were various things going on. There were issues about whether she, whether they'd got her records mixed up, because at some point the hospital records were incorrect. But anyway, basically, the story of the woman who was on the receiving end of what she certainly considered to be a miracle was that her they were trying to she and her husband were trying to have another baby, and her womb was just in this terrible state and was completely not going to be ready for her to conceive, and then I believe she prayed. And she went to some meeting where she was also prayed for. And then she went after that, very soon after that, she went to the hospital, and the woman who examined her said, my goodness, I can't believe it. Your womb is perfect. Your womb is just absolutely, there's nothing wrong with it. We can't even tell that you had the previous baby that we know you have had. Your womb is so utterly as if brand new. But she never conceived another baby, and about 3 years later, she had to have her womb taken out anyway. But it didn't affect her faith. She still regarded it as a miracle. She said, well, 3 years later, I was in a much better place for it to happen, whereas at the time I wasn't in a good place to have my womb removed. And so I'm still seeing this as God's miracle. And it just seemed so pointless. It just such a waste of God's powers, to give her supposedly this fantastic brand new womb and then ignore a child with leukemia.
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
I found that a very, very odd story.
Yeah. Yeah, these stories of amazing God intervening and doing amazing things, it just turns the knife for the family of the child who is dying of cancer, or the young mum who's in it with terminal illness.
I mentioned this last month about that was my observation, that there almost needs to be a lot of healing for the people who haven't been healed, because it's so damaging when they've been waiting and praying and then they see someone who supposedly has. So granted, even if it was real, you've still got tension and lots of issues going on with exactly the point you made there, Ed. Which seems unanswerable, really. Why you could have a reason why. When then people get upset, they say, well, your faith it's never God's fault. So it's either his ordination or it's your lack of faith, depending on what church you belong to. It's so complicated theology to deal with that. People have emotions and feelings and get quite hurt by it.
There was a fun thing, just sort of lighten things up again, with Dr. Sean George, who we discussed last episode, who survived flatlining for an hour and a bit with a heart attack, and just had CPR and stuff. And when he was asked in this Miracles conference why it was him who was healed and not all the other people, and he just had nothing, he just said he had no idea why God acted as he did for me and not for others. So it's not like there's any rhyme or reason to any of this that is perceivable. And in that story, I was listening to it again for the preparation for last month's show. He had this story about how it was so amazing that he was useless at following directions and everything, and he suddenly had this skill to get to the clinic when he was driving on the freeway out, outside the city or something. He got straight to the clinic, no problem at all. It wasn't amazing that God was helping him. And then when he got there, he didn't note the irony at all that the key doctor who was going to treat him, he was out to lunch. And so he needn't have got there in great time because he had to wait.
Sorry,
he had to come back from lunch.
I wondered what you meant then in terms of expression.
Oh, it's out to lunch.
Yeah, genuinely, he was out to lunch. Yes.
No.
He was literally out to lunch.
I was so
Yes,
confused.
it wasn't a sandwich short of a picnic.
Right,
that's
sorry.
right.
He was actually literally out to lunch. Okay. You literalist, you.
Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so that's so what we're doing is sort of all these features of miracles as they actually are, and it doesn't quite tally as well as you'd expect with the kind of Christian picture of it all. Something I thought came out from your unbelievable discussion with Ken Fish, Francis, was you could put miracles in two categories if they're the kinds that really are being pushed as, look, isn't this amazing? Rather than just, your flu got better a bit quicker than expected or your bad back's improved. If they've got good medical records, the healings which are being talked about they are rare, but they are natural processes, like remission from a long-term illness can occasionally happen.
Yeah.
So I suppose like the MS sufferer that we had last time.
Yes. Yeah, that we talked about.
And or Dr. Sean George again. It turned out it's rare, but it does happen. The sort of thing that happened to him. So you've got that kind. If you've got the medical records, it can be something that's extremely rare, but still within the purview of kind of natural processes. If it's something that, from our point of view, really cannot be squared with natural processes, like a little finger growing, which was another thing that you had on your show.
Yeah.
Suddenly, there's no medical records, and it's sort of stories, and it's a long way away, and all that sort of thing.
Yes, and there's supposed to be a reason why people wouldn't want this publicised. To colour me unconvinced.
Yeah.
Did you bring in, either of you, the idea that some Christian thoughts, we might have just touched on it, that actually the reason, in fact, that the West and everyone over here doesn't have miracles, I was told this by someone about 10 years ago, it's precisely because of skepticism and unbelief. You need an atmosphere of belief and faith for it to happen. Taken, of course, from some of the gospel stories where, you have, if you have faith of whatever, you can move mountains. And so this idea that, in fact, what we're doing now is exactly what will stop miracles actually happening. What would you say to that?
Well, there's certainly this idea that the poorer countries have these spiritual riches that we've lost in the West because they have such complete faith in God, and that's why God is so active in these third world and poor countries, and not in our affluent West, where we don't feel the need to turn to God because we can go and buy whatever. Perhaps not exactly whatever we need, but we're much more likely to be able to sort out our own needs through our affluence. So I know that that's a thing, and I suppose you either buy that or you don't.
But see, I suppose the complex thing there is that's from a critical point of view, that's exactly where people believe real miracles has happened, because they've got those assumptions, they've got the supernatural. In the bad stuff of supernatural, the good stuff of supernatural, it's all a given. So when a miracle supposedly happens, they've got no problem of thinking about Hume and all of these ancient sort of skeptics. So they just go, wow, this is God and amazing, or this is the devil even. But so that's used for that. But then the other way around is that, from my observation, that's where we see gullibility. That's where we see that story at New Wine. It's precisely because of that a real miracle didn't happen, but it's believed it did. And so we've actually got another clash of worldviews, which is difficult to get out of. Seeing it like that both ways.
Yep. I want to move on.
You again?
Yeah. Just out of, because we're going to link to this show, Francis, you were promised some documentation at the end of the show by Ken on one of the miracles, because it
Well, I think that, to be fair, that was reliant on him getting it from the woman, and I can't remember which of the women it was. Both miracles concerned women, but the short answer is I never got it. I never. I think it was in the case of the lady whose womb had been healed. I think that was the one. And they said, and Justin asked Ken if you can get further documentation, will you send it to Francis? And he said yes. But anyway, I've heard nothing since.
Yeah.
And I've also not had my invitation. Perhaps Ken Fish hasn't come back here, but that was another thing. He did say that if he came back to the UK on one of his ministries, he would get in touch and invite me to attend one of his meetings. But I've never heard anything. But then, to be fair, I'm sure I'm not a particularly memorable person in his world, and I've slipped off his horizon.
Yeah, that I sort of mention it because it's a bit of a pattern. Because when Craig Keener was on Unbelievable, he wrote this massive book on miracles, both in the early church and with Jesus, and modern ones. And in that show, there was lots of talk about this amazing miracle, which I'm not sure who it was. And the skeptic was a chap called Jeff he was from Ireland, I think. And he kept pushing for the medical verification, which they promised him. And there was a blog he wrote and stuff, and it never turned up. He kept pushing and asking, and it, after the show, and it just never appeared.
Yeah.
So I'll link to that show as well in the show notes. Now, Andrew, this is a good one for you. Would you blow me down? Would you believe it that there's a massive section of Christianity that denies healings, just like our skeptics do?
Yes, you can't win for losing, can you? And this is cessationism is pretty big. It's a highly vocal section of evangelical Christianity that goes back quite a while, but I would say probably is more of a modern in the history of the church. It does seem like in the history of the church, miracles were very much part of, or at least the passing on of belief in miracles, of exciting people to become Christians, along with the threat of the traditional hell. Both sort of did the trick, as it were. But there is a theology out there. And I don't know if, Francis, you heard of something called the Strange Fire Conference.
No, should I
have? Well, it may have just come up in a lot of apologist situations or things that you've listened to. Ed, you must have been aware of that.
Yes,
the
right,
John MacArthur one. Well, I mean, I was aware way back as my family was moving very much into charismatic Christianity. I was very much aware that there were people who are non-charismatic. And what I mean by that, for anyone who doesn't know, that the charismatic Christian is someone who sort of celebrates today that the things that you read in the Bible in terms of what are called the gifts of the Spirit, that would often be speaking in tongues, which is a heavenly language in that belief, plus miracles of various levels. They all happen today. They all happen through Jesus. And this is the kind of background I was in. And I was staunchly aware of people who were anti-charismatic, who didn't believe the so-called gifts of the Spirit, so that would be healings and miracles, were actually I did this on my Christian Diversity YouTube channel. I did a section on miracles, and you've got people who actually say that the gift of tongues is a sign of the devil. So they do actually still believe in the devil and the devil's works. But when you get to this level of highly almost like that, they would see that all these miracles are actually counterfeits to what they see in the Gospels, and they have a point, not, I don't think theologically in the Bible, but they have a point in the sense that John MacArthur, one of the people at Strange Fire, the big name, he would say that all of the miracles in the church are a pale imitation, fake, not even coming close to the miraculous of the New Testament. Very true. Very, very true. And so there's, you can see how people use different things to their argument, and we don't see these great things. So what the Strange Fire Conference was about 10 years ago now, they were basically saying that the 500 million Christians who are charismatic and Pentecostal were not real Christians. And he categorically, whether he's pushed back a bit now, categorically said that the 500 million charismatics were actually demonstrating that they were not of Christ, that they were not saved. They were hell-bound people, which would have included your entire church, Ed, and mine, and all of us in one go. And their argument is in fact that John MacArthur wrote a book called Charismatic Chaos. And he's basically looking at all of this fakery, all of these sort of TV evangelist ones into corruption and no validation. Matter of fact, we would need no other person than to have him on this podcast critiquing. So like I say, with almost anything to do with Christianity, I can actually genuinely sit back and just watch other Christians self-deconstruct. And there you have it. The cessationist movement is out there as a highly vocal group, normally Calvinistic, Reformed theology people.
Yeah, that's the thing. These are not your greenbelt Christians.
No.
They're probably more fundamentalist than lots of charismatics in a way.
Yes, they're much more inerrantist of the Bible. They're much more, very much, they tend to be very reformed. So it was like the James Whites of, I believe, is a cessationist. And they all sort of believe God speaks to you in a way, and there is some sort of thing going on there. But they don't, I mean, they would completely be the opposite to Benny Hinn's and all the Pentecostals. And they would just say, right off the bat, what was meant to be in Pentecostalism, and perhaps even in your background, Ed, the witness of God was meant to be the power of God. It was meant to be the power in the world, demonstrating to the world, and people like the Francises of this world going, oh my gosh, look at this group of Christians. They have something. Well, the cessationists just dismiss the lot as demonic. So it's just, to me, I just look at the world and I go, it's crazy. Christianity is so diverse. It just, even on this issue, falls apart.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, that's my rant.
Yes. I had a go at this just a couple of weeks ago to see. There's a Facebook group called Christian Apologetics. It's a private group, but they let you in very easily. And I asked what were the arguments in favour of cessationism, and it was really interesting. And the best one was probably a talk at this conference, an hour-long talk. And I'll link to it in the show notes. But I thought, if that's the best you've got, this is really poor. Because they didn't use any scriptures saying that, the scriptures meaning kind of text from the Bible, saying that miracles were going to finish at the end of the apostolic age, which is a key thing. It was all kind of speculative arguments. They used the Bible all over the place, but only to try to sort of feed into these constructions of how they see God acting, not because he says he's acting that way. It's trying to sort of construct this theory. And the key one was that I'm sure you've heard this loads, Andrew, that you only get miracles in the Bible around Moses, then around Elijah and Elisha, and then around Jesus and the apostles. And so the norm is not miracles rather than miracles. And there was a big reason for all of the three of Moses and Elijah and then Jesus. And when that reason isn't required, then the miracles stop. That was really the only key argument.
Yeah, and that's actually quite a good one. If you're going to have an argument at all, it would be bringing up the whole issue of the reason for great miraculous. And if you can find a theme like Moses Elisha and Jesus, you go, oh gosh, okay, so, but that's not quite how the Book of Acts seems to take it on, though. If you think about it, unless, of course, you then have to go into those characters like Peter and Paul, who are sort of doing healings and things. You have to say, well, this is the sign. I mean, James White would say something like that, I believe. I believe I'm not wrong in this, that when the canon is closed, one of the cessation arguments is that's when the miracles stop. We've now got the perfect word of God. And it's a crazy argument in one sense, but they have to try and do something, because either miracles aren't really happening and people can really see it, or they're scared of miracles and the spiritual nature of God in that way. Who knows the reasonings of cessationists, but they're definitely there. Interesting discussion.
Yeah. I kept asking them, well, what's special about Elijah and Elisha, that why suddenly God needed to do miracles then? And, you know, with Moses and Jesus, there's some plausibility in the discussion, in that they're bringing in this new revelation, and it needs to have some welly to sort of show that it's real. But there's nothing like that with Elijah and Elisha. They didn't write anything. It just sort of, suddenly there were lots of miracles, and then they went away again.
Particular theme. It gets more complex when we find out that some of the Jesus stories, it's argued, would be rewrites of Elisha. And of course, Matthew presents Jesus as the new Moses. So you've got themes. And when I ever think of themes, I think of less historical stuff going on.
Yes. Well, I'm hoping that we'll have time to look at that in more detail in a bit.
Yeah.
What I will say is, and this comes up to me again and again in this discussion of miracles, what they are saying relies entirely on the purpose of miracles. Is the sort of Gospel of John version. It's just basically Jesus showing off to underline his credentials. It's not at all about loving and caring for sick people and wanting them to get better.
Not in John, no.
Well, yeah, that's right. But that's the whole argument relies on that. That miracles are only there to big up the new revelation. They're not there because of actually God cares about people.
Or it's to bring about faith, basically. It's we'll get into that later about the synoptics being the opposite, where you actually need a lot of faith or not much happens. But John is to bring about faith, so there's signs and interesting.
Yeah. So whichever way you look at it, it doesn't really work, because presumably with there's lots of unbelief and opportunities for the gospel these days, but God doesn't seem to be doing miracles to convince people. Or if he does hide them away in Madagascar where no one can notice.
Yes, or people revert to the synoptic point, which is you haven't got enough faith, as opposed to John, which is like, I will have faith if I see something, and well, okay, you can't win.
Okay. Let's move on then. And one of the last ones is the way that other religions and cultures also report miracles.
Yeah.
Now, Robert and Christian, who we're kind of in communication with a bit, are saying this is something they will definitely pick their ears up when we get to in this part of the episode, because they think that miracles are much more of a thing in Christianity than in other religious cultures.
Oh, interesting.
So, sorry?
Interesting. No, that's an interesting. They're probably leaning forward now to the speakers to listen. That's why.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Francis, you've got some stuff on this.
Well, I looked at miracles in ancient culture, and one being who came up a lot was, now I'm not sure if I'm going to say this correctly, Asclepius, who was the god of medicine. And there were numerous temples all over Greece and surrounding areas to the honor of Asclepius. And the idea was that you would go to the temple, you would, with whatever your illness was, you would sleep there, and usually Asclepius would come to you in a dream, and he might either give you advice about how to cure your illness, or you would just wake from the dream and find that you were cured. And there were a few impressive examples. And when people had been cured, they would leave a testimonial at the temple. And testimonials that are found in these sites include one person who despaired of any cure after suffering for 2 years from an illness which caused him to cough up bloody flesh all day long. But he went to the temple of Asclepius and had a dream where Asclepius told him to eat salad and gave him a recipe for salad, and that cured him. And there were, there are a few others. Another one was a war veteran called, I'm not going to get this pronunciation right either, Eupius, who had a spearhead lodged in his jaw for 6 years. And after a dream at the temple, he awoke with his injury healed and the spearhead in his hand. So, one of the interesting things about Asclepius, apart from the fact he did all these miracles, but interesting in the context of our podcast and comparing it with Christianity, was that he was seen by early Christians as Jesus's greatest antagonist, because they felt, well, here we are saying that Jesus did all these miracles, and look, now there's someone else who claims to be doing equally extraordinary miracles. And one of the early Christians, Justin the Martyr, said in his first apology, chapter 22, and in the way that we say that that is, Jesus made the whole lame, the paralytic, and those born blind, we seem to say what is very similar to the deeds said to have been done by Asclepius. And I think his point was that it was, in a sense, it was almost the inverse of what I'm arguing now, introducing Asclepius. He was saying, well, all you non-believers in Jesus are so skeptical when we tell you about his miracles. Well, look at you. You believe in Asclepius's miracles, don't you? So how can you be skeptical about the miracles of Jesus? And I'm sort of coming at it from the other direction, saying, well, you Christians, you would obviously all be skeptical about the miracles of Asclepius, and but you expect us to believe in the miracles of Jesus.
Yep,
that's very interesting. Do you know what I have to read this out. I've got something very, very similar to that you may both have heard of, but probably maybe some of the people listening have, and maybe they haven't. But this will tie into the book that I'll mention a bit later about the miracles in the Gospels. But look, this book opens up with this, and I find this, when I first read it, I was completely stunned, and it needs looking into. In the first century of the Common Era, there appeared at the eastern end of the Mediterranean a remarkable religious leader who taught the worship of one true God and declared that religion meant not the sacrifice of beasts, but the practice of charity and piety and the shunning of hatred and enmity. He was said to have worked miracles of goodness, casting out demons, healing the sick, raising the dead. His exemplary life led some of his followers to claim he was the Son of God, though he called himself the Son of a Man. Accused of sedition against Rome, he was arrested. After his death, his disciples claimed he had risen from the dead, appeared to them alive, and then ascended to heaven. Who was this teacher and wonder worker? His name was Apollonius of Tyana. He died about 98 AD, and his story may be read in Flavius Rostatus. Readers who too hastily assumed that the preceding described Apollonius's slightly earlier contemporary, Jesus of Nazareth, may be forgiven this error. So that's interesting. That needs looking into. It was a later person in evidently historical, and there was a whole belief around him, and apparently in the early days there was rivals between Apollonius's followers and Jesus, in the same way that you just mentioned, Francis. This needs researching and looking into. Some people might be shocked at hearing that, but there was something going on there. So
yeah,
it's an example.
It is ground that is raked over a lot in apologetic circles.
Yes, so it is, and people have different arguments. They say, well, it's later, so it's obviously copying Jesus, but then they dismiss anything where Jesus seems to be copying Elisha,
That's good.
That's a good one on that one.
I think if we want to look particularly at one religious culture where there are miracles, I would think Hindu culture and Indian culture would be a place to go.
Definitely.
Because you do hear a lot. And there's this famous chap, Sai Baba, who was supposed to have done a lot of miracles. And there's a a nice Amazon book by a professor from Iceland who kind of wrote up lots of these miracle stories and stuff, and he tried to be kind of balanced about it. But people reading the book say, "Oh yeah, that's it seems that Sai Baba's genuine." So there's a lot of talk of miracles there. There's a famous Ganesha drinking milk thing that's often discussed, and that's more an indication of the believability, or if you're allowed to say the word, gullibility of people, rather than anything that we would want to sort of say, "Oh, that's impressive, let's look into it," because it was these statues drinking milk, but actually it was sort of capillary action that was causing the milk to disappear. I think you're familiar with that one, Francis, aren't you?
I've heard of it. I mean, I wouldn't say I know tons about it, but yes, I've certainly heard about it, and it attracted a lot of attention. I seem to remember that.
Yeah.
And yes, I mean, I think it's known that what's happening is completely natural.
Yeah.
And not miraculous at all.
You mentioned the Hindu Indian kind of thing, Ed, because that actually ties right into my experience, because anyone listening to this might think, well, you guys know nothing. I mean, maybe you were half Christian, weren't really in a true church or something like that. Well, in terms of the charismatic side, obviously I'd be a non-Christian by the cessationists of John MacArthur ilk, obviously, but I was in the charismatic church in what is called the Toronto Blessing. And I was right in the thick of incredibly perceived supernatural stuff, not so much healings, but bizarre things, put it that way, more Darren Brownie than anything else. Now, I was absolutely, I was convinced it was of God at the time, until people started saying it was the devil. So I was, at least it was supernatural one way or the other. and then I saw as somebody who'd really critiqued this, and they showed some actual video footage of Hindu meetings that were pretty close to what I was in, and they were called Kundalini Hindu meetings, which had been going on for thousands of years, evidently, in Hindu meetings. And these people were flapping about, making noises, laughing. And I actually saw, talking about video evidence, I actually saw videos that looked just like the meetings I was in, but it had nothing to do with Jesus, nothing to do with Christ, nothing to do with the gospel, and yet everything to do with the same actions. And I thought, oh my God, in bit like that person in Friends that says that. And oh my, and I thought, oh my goodness, both, to me, it's something else must have been happening, because people were assigning it to God or the devil. And now I saw it in Hindu meetings, and I thought, something else is going on. I'm not convinced this is of Jesus anymore, or even religiously. It must be more Darren Brownie. I still don't know quite what was happening, but I don't think it was Jesus, basically. So, that's my story.
Yeah. Then you also get Christian miracles around bits of Christianity that loads of people would reject. So like Virgin Mary apparitions and statues of Mary doing weeping or various stuff. So that's miracles sort of outside that seem to give welly to doctrines and ideas which loads of Christians would completely be aghast at.
Exactly. And also, so if you're a Protestant, you wouldn't accept that.
Yes, that's right. And it's from the Protestants that the apologists are sort of telling us about all these amazing miracles of Christianity.
Yes, and you find that they're Catholic stories in a wolf's clothing. Yeah.
And then, of course, there's all the miracles in the 2nd century, which Christians completely reject. But Jesus,
stacks of them.
Turning clay sparrows into live sparrows and things like that.
Yeah, that's right.
This the apocryphal.
Yes, that's stories, right. Which most Christians have no problem in believing that they're made up and nonsense. And, like John being put in a vat of boiling water and something or other, or I think Paul was beheaded and then it came together again. There's all kinds of stories that I need to check out, but they're in these sort of later Christian writings written by Christian people. And most Christians or apologists will just sort of push that aside and say that's just Christians with a bit of loose wiring, which they wouldn't apply to gospel writing, of course, but but they do to those books. So good point.
Okay, so that is the end of my kind of survey of miracles in the round.
Yeah.
So our contention is that when you look at the whole package that they point more against Christianity than towards it.
Yeah, or very confusing to point to it.
Yeah,
that's what I would say, on almost on every angle.
So should we turn now to the 50 Arguments for Faith book and the chapter 28 called The Credibility of Jesus' Miracles?
Yep.
It was by Craig Bloomberg, who is a leading evangelical New Testament scholar at the Denver Seminary. So it sounds like it's not a mainstream university, but I think he's among conservatives. He's a well-respected.
Yeah, I've certainly heard of him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wasn't he one of the people that Lee-Strobel went to see?
Yes, that's right.
As part of his, air quotes, investigation into
Yes.
Christianity.
Yes, that's right.
With renowned evangelical apologist scholars who are scholars, but they're on.
Yes, no. They are scholars, but I mean,
he could have been more well-rounded. Put it that way. Yeah.
Yes. I think that would be the most charitable way to talk about it.
Yeah.
What did you make of it? This chapter.
What did you think, Andrew?
Throw
the ball to you.
Throw the ball to me. I have to confess, I didn't read it recently for this, but I read that some time back. So I need to sort of put my memory being put on the spot like that. Is that the same with you, Francis?
It is. Well, yes. Okay.
There you go. I thought there's a hint there. There's a hint there.
But busted.
Busted. What did you think of that? Well, I thought it was great. What did you think of it? You first. Why not? Okay. Anyone out there listening, email in what you think, because we didn't read it.
I read it again this afternoon.
I have read it in the past, so I'll probably come to mind about it. But yes,
so
go on then, Ed.
He was fending off a lot of reasons why the miracles of Jesus aren't like to be made up. Particularly the kind of idea that they were feeding off miracle stories from the culture rather than from anything that happened. And he picked up this thing that you are quite keen on, Andrew, that the inspiration, the kind of literary inspiration, you could say, of the gospel miracle stories seems to be Elijah and Elisha, because so many of the accounts in Elijah and Elijah have parallels in the Gospels. And so that's something that you really are good to talk about, which I'll let you kind of get onto that soon. But talking about kind of the things he uses to big up the idea that Jesus really did do these miracles, one is that the opponents of Jesus, according to the narratives, didn't say the skeptical thing and say, "Oh no, these miracles don't happen." They say, "Oh, he does miracles using the devil, or he's a sorcerer, or that kind of thing." So that's something you could have a quick chat about.
Yeah. So you mean the idea that it must be true because it's happening, so it's either of God or the spiritual realm of the dark side. Yes. You mean?
Yeah. So I think the idea is that the gospel authors are accurately describing the debate, and the debate is either Jesus did the miracles through the hand of the devil, or he did them by the hand of God.
So it's the immediate. That's a bit like the third world scenario, where it's the supernatural is a given, and so yeah. Sorry, Francis.
So I was going to say, so it's a bit like the empty tomb debate, which is often relied on by Christians, if I've understood this correctly, that Christians say, well, if you look in the Bible, you'll see that they were trying to explain how the tomb was empty. Therefore, that means they accepted that the tomb was empty. Therefore, that means the tomb was empty. I mean, is that how he's arguing it? That
that's a very good parallel.
Yes. Well, I mean, first of all, it does depend on the gospel accounts themselves of what people were saying being accurate. That's I think that's one thing.
Yes. And I think it would be culturally weird if suddenly characters in the Gospels were saying, "Oh no, that's just a false memory," or this person's using sleight of hand. That's a very modern sort of response.
It is, yes. At the time, people were in the mindset where they expected, I don't know, supernatural things to happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and it was just a question of, so it wasn't that you would just reject that completely and say, no, my naturalistic worldview is, because you didn't have a naturalistic worldview. So it was quite credible that
or what
Jesus
we would call
did various
supernatural
things.
was their naturalistic worldview,
Yes,
which was
I
the
suppose so,
heavens
yes.
were populated with every kind of deity and sort of angelic or demonic or different gods. I mean, I'm talking about the wider surrounding culture. It was a given. So when you made some statement about something, you're not going to go, well, that doesn't happen. It's like, okay, what's the source of that then would have been a question that might come to
yes.
mind, you know.
Yeah.
Was it this person? Was it Apollonius? Was it
Yes.
the Heavenly Father? You know.
Okay. Another point you made was that when you look at parallel healing accounts in other cultures of the first century, there's a lot more kind of magical formula side of things and sort of paraphernalia associated with it. It wasn't just a nice, clean, pure healing like Jesus did.
Well, what about when Jesus spat in the mud?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And then was dropped apparently by Matthew and Luke.
Yes.
Which is like, oh dear, this looks a bit like probably.
Yeah.
And it's like, we'll drop that. So that's interesting. Right there on that very point. Why didn't the others pick up on that and go with it? You know?
Yeah.
And
they didn't like the idea of somebody seeing people walking like trees walking or something. Jesus managing only to do a half a healing, and then that was all edited out as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, and in Mark he says he could not do any miracles in his hometown, whereas in Matthew, if I remember rightly, again need to fact check. If I remember rightly, if you go to Matthew, it's he did not do any in his hometown. Okay, which slightly, if you think about it, you could say, well, what's the difference? Well, a major difference. You know, you could not do something, or you didn't do something.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
You know, I could not go to work today, or I didn't go to work today. It's a massive difference. You know, so. If Mark then is more primitive and more sort of in this vein of some of these other people doing similar things in the assumptions, is Jesus actually being slowly moved to a different level? And I do think we do find that when we get to John in comparison, by the way. So yeah.
Okay. He says there are a few believable parallel accounts for the nature miracles. So I'm not quite sure what he meant there. He wasn't really filled out.
What, the calming of the storm?
Yeah, that's right. So apparently it's believable in the Gospels, but it's not believable, the equivalent sort of things in Greek culture or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, so isn't he saying that you just don't find them in
Well,
Greek culture?
he does use
right?
this word believable parallel accounts. He doesn't say there's no parallel accounts.
Right. Okay. I mean, there's even one. It's argued that calming of the storm is kind of taken from Jonah, and that's that's of Jonah and the so-called whale or the big fish scenario with the storm and calmed and coming back. Is some similar affinities to Jesus calming the storm. So, but you're talking about outside of the history of the Bible, you mean?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. I'd have to look into that to see what's going on with those kind of miracles.
Then he mentioned how apocryphal Christian miracle accounts are more frivolous. So that's the point we've already made about making the clay sparrows into real sparrows.
Although perhaps I wouldn't describe it as frivolous, but there's the cursing of the fig tree. I mean, that's an odd one, isn't it?
Yeah. I think if the walking on water was the second century one, we'd say, oh, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But there are that's right. There are some older stories of walking on water though, in outside of the Bible. Apparently, I'm pretty sure I was reading that fairly recently. That's an interesting one. But the fig tree is complex enough as it is because the Gospels portray it quite differently as well, and it seems to be making a point. Again, when something makes a very strong point about something, or of course in the story Jesus is trying to make a point, I think anyway, by the reason it's written, but it does. There's a lot of problems anyway with the narrative of that one. Same with the 5,000 that we've looked at. If that's a nature miracle, is it?
Yeah. Then I think this is his best point, and that is the criteria of authenticity. When you apply them to the Gospels, they confirm the miracles as much as any of the other traditions in the Gospels.
Right. As opposed to, say, the 2nd century stories.
Well, I think he's saying, that a famous thing that is well confirmed by the authenticity, the criteria of authenticity, is that Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist.
Oh, right. So
that ticks lots of boxes.
Right. Okay.
And he's saying these the tradition that Jesus performed miracles is as well authenticated as anything else in the Gospels when you use these criteria.
What are the criteria then?
There's loads of them. It's the sort of thing John Nelson talked to us about when he was on in the early days.
Criteria of embarrassment.
I was going to say, are we talking about criterion of embarrassment?
Yeah, that's right.
I forget some of the other ones now, but that's the big one.
Yeah, that's the only one I can remember.
Yeah,
criterion of embarrassment.
Multiple attestation.
That's right.
Multiple attestations.
Yes. And that's thrown around an awful lot because that's like the whole argument. If there's no Q, and then the others are all copying from Mark, and if Mark was written as a more of a hearsay or some kind of theme, it's less historical. And suddenly you realise there's no multiple sources anymore, and you get into deep trouble.
Yes, and another one, I forget what his name is, but if you've got a tradition that makes a nice link from the Jewish world of the 1st century on the one hand, and the Christian world of the 1st century that arose from it, if it's something that kind of makes the link, then that's a good.
Have you got an example of that would be argued? At all? You mean something like?
I guess Jesus saying he was going to come back within the lifetime of the.
So Jesus
hearers?
saying that, and then the say Paul and the church is mentioning something similar.
Yeah, so I think it works as something a 1st century Jewish apocalyptic teacher would be likely to say. Yes,
that's a very good point, that a 1st century apocalypse would say that.
And then it also fits with what the letters are reporting about Jesus later on.
Yes, and also, I might add, testifies to one great big non-miracle of a failure of prediction.
Well, that's
that's another story.
Subliminally why I chose it.
Yes.
But, so when he's saying that when you apply these criteria of authenticity, the miracle accounts and healing accounts in the Gospels tick the boxes as well as other stuff, which is fine by me. In that,
right.
I'm not the kind of one of these ultra liberals who say, I believe all the nice Jesus bits in the Gospel.
We'll cut out the miracles.
Everything else,
like one of the American founding fathers. Yeah.
I
forget who that was.
So that's basically the book. But I'm quite keen now for you to pick up on this Elijah and Elijah, because we've sort of dipped in and out.
Yeah.
I want you to go both barrels now, Andrew.
Right. Okay. Full steam ahead. Yes. Well, that's very interesting because that does tie into almost everything we're saying. And what the points that you just made about Bloomberg, you get, when you're a lay person, and I've studied theology at Bible College and sort of become a little bit slightly more than a lay person, but I'm no scholar. When you read of scholars and you read of the differences between them in terms of different views and outcomes, you have to take, as a non-scholarly person, you've got to take the rough with the smooth. You've got to take the different, that book we were talking about, what's his name, lee-strobel, didn't take a nice rounded group of evangelical and other scholars, because scholars who present and do their lives studying the Bible do come up with different things, and you have to actually yourself see what might come across to you as a good argument and not so good argument. And that's what I try to do. And that was as a Christian, I was doing that, and then moving to a non-Christian. But there are scholars that basically say the opposite to what Bloomberg was saying, and saying that the gospel, and some of them would be sort of evangelical as well, that actually the miracle stories of Jesus are very closely repeating or sort of re-going over the same stories of Elisha and Elijah and sometimes other characters in the Bible. And this is interesting. There's a great book called Gospel Fictions by Randel Helms. I was blown away by it, because at least the majority of it, because I was stunned at how close that I'd never, some people may read the story of a healing of someone in the Gospels and suddenly go, oh, that's quite similar to Elisha. I would imagine that would happen. Didn't happen to me. I suddenly thought, oh my gosh, that's similar. And there's a woman at the gate in one story, there's a woman at the gate in the other. There's a little child there, a little child here. Jesus says this, Elisha says that. And I'm thinking, this is too close for comfort. So I was presented with the idea that the career of Jesus, by some scholars' estimation, is actually filled out by the details of Old Testament stories, not necessarily eyewitness account. Oh, Jesus did this, Jesus did that. It's like, I wonder, okay, Jesus must have done something like this, so we'll rewrite the story. And there's different reasons to why someone might have rewritten the story, whether it's, I talked to John Nelson about this, if you think this, in my last conversation with him, actually, I was saying, I'm presented with this, then with that question. Did Jesus then go around deliberately, like if he had a video camera, thinking to himself, not telling anyone, I am enacting out Elisha's story here with this child, and I'm going to enact out that story, and I'm thinking, you could remove all that and just say that the writer literally created Jesus' stories in light of these old ones and miss out completely Jesus acting out anything, if you wanted to go that far. Or you do have this idea that Jesus is simply doing this amazing that most people could miss, but he's actually repeating everything someone else has done, like choosing a woman, choosing a child, healing the child this way. So it raises the question on the nature of the healings. The feeding of the 5,000, Ed, I believe you brought up.
Yeah, that really struck me when I saw it.
Yeah. So what did you bring up there with John McClatchy a couple of months ago?
Remember, we went on so long with that one that we decided not to include it in the episode that we podcasted.
That's right.
The material we podcasted. It's only about 3 or 4 verses in the Book of Kings, I think, and Elisha, I think it was, feeds 100 soldiers with just a few, more than 5 loaves and 2 fishes. I think about 20 barley loaves.
Yeah.
But presumably a barley loaf is like a kind of small bun for us. And I thought, wow, that's amazing that this feeding a load of people from a small amount of bread is something
similar.
Yeah.
And you would imagine that it's interesting, because if you discover this just by yourself, obviously people have done that, and you raise as a question at what that means. Is Jesus simply going, oh, you all know this story, I'm now going to do something greater, so we now have 5,000 instead of 100, and so we now go, so he's bigger than Elijah. The question still comes down to, I remember talking to John Nelson about this, is Jesus physically enacting, or are the writers just creating and crafting with a theme? But we already know that the Gospels are in different orders, and they feel free to do this over here, and Jesus does the temple at the beginning, and then in the others it's at the end. We already know that the historical chronology is all over the place. And so I'm wondering then, if could the author of Mark simply have created some stories to think, well, Jesus must have done more than Elisha, so I'll create this story. Now, one of the things that was really persuasive in the book for me isn't just that point. It's actually that the Greek structure of the sentences is remarkably close of the Septuagint of the Old Testament and the New Testament story. That's quite interesting, because there you think, okay, this is like, oh my gosh, this is a bit like a synoptic problem. It's like Matthew has lots of Mark word for word. there's some similar lines. It's the same Greek word for this, and it's the same for them. And Randel Helms points out all these things, and he does it in at least 12 or 15 stories.
Wow.
And I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, because that is something that most average church reading Christians in English in the NIV are never going to pick up. So that's why scholars, in one sense, you have to listen to at least what they're saying before you dismiss them, you know. And I was persuaded more by Christian scholars, even more liberal, and having a sort of a cross sign up against non-Christian scholars at the beginning. So that was my stance. And so anyway, and then the other big one is the difference between John and the synoptics. And we've just covered this before. But the essence of John, as you mentioned, Ed, is that the signs, there's a lot about signs, and there's so-called 7 signs, and there's a bit of problem with the chronology of those. But they're signs to bring about faith. So it's argued that in John, God and Jesus is talking all about himself as the Son of God or as God, or something divine. And that to show who he is, he does a sign, and people without faith suddenly have faith, so that you may know that you have eternal life, or you may know that he's the Son of God or something like that. Whereas in the synoptics, you get all these stories where he can't do it in this town because of the faith, and you need faith. And if you have faith and you're struggling, and you need prayer. And so the idea in the synoptics is there's a thing about, please give us a sign. Somebody says, do you remember that in one of the Gospels?
Yes, and Jesus says no.
And Jesus says no. And do you know what? That's the same word as all the signs in John. Okay, it's the same word. So Jesus says no. In John, he's not only talking to the world about everything. There's no messianic secret. He's no sort of like, don't tell anyone. It's like, have I not told you all? You know, I've done nothing in secret, he says in one part in John. So it's like there's 2 Jesuses. It's like you go across one side of the mountain and there's this other guy, you know, speaking from the rooftops, doing signs to bring about faith. And then you go back around to the synoptic Jesus, and this guy's saying, don't tell anyone, you know, you need faith. Oh, you need more than that to get the demons out. And, you know, you need a bit of mud and it might not work properly. This is a big difference. This is stunning to me, you know, and yet I didn't even notice it when I was growing up in the church. I didn't even notice it. You just blend the 2 together. And so anyway, so that's my, again, rant. For anyone to go and research, please do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Here's a verse from Luke at the end of the parable, or maybe not parable, about Lazarus, the poor man at the
with Lazarus.
There's the poor man at the gate, and Lazarus was the rich man, wasn't he?
Dives and Lazarus. Not sure if I've pronounced.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So that's the Luke.
Yeah. Luke, the end of Luke, and then it finishes off. So he says, no, Father Abraham, he said, if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. And he said to him, if they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead. So what's the point of all this gospel proof of the resurrection?
And half of John saying, I am the light of the world, and here's a sign, you know, so you know, may you believe. Interesting. Very interesting. But that ties into the synoptic theme, by the way. It's pretty consistent. You know, that's you're right. It's that what you just read is very consistent with the synoptics. I shall not give you a sign. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's right. So there's again, if you're going into themes, look at them.
Well, they're given the sign of Jonah, which seems to, which is all about rising from the dead, which seems to sort of conflict with that verse.
Well, of course it does, because if someone rises from the dead, it's like it won't even convince them.
And it's kind of conflicts with almost all apologetic argument, which is that the evidence of the resurrection is so strong that anybody who looks at it seriously will believe.
And there's a verse right in front of you that's saying that they won't, even if.
Yes, that's right. Yes, it make no. Well,
so read the words of Scripture, for goodness' sake. You're going to be.
If anybody
biblical.
accuses me of being irrational by not believing, I'll just say, well, you know, look what Jesus said.
Yeah, Francis, just say, believe the Bible. I do.
Yes,
that's fine. That's fine. We've got the words of Scripture right in front of you, saying these things. Anyway, there you go. So I think it's a launch point for people to go and research. If I'd heard this on a podcast, say when I was about 22, I would have been going fuming and saying, these guys are wrong, they don't know what they're talking about, and go and research. Good. That's what you need to be thinking right now, and then go and research. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's the approach on this. Did you notice, Ed, by the way, that the lost ending of Mark?
Yeah.
Well, have you ever thought that it's actually quite one of the arguments for why it's added on and tacked on in the 2nd century is because precisely it sounds like by the time we get to the 2nd century, all of these stories were abounding about incredible miracles. Incredible things were happening in the stories of the apocryphal so-called Gospels. It sounds similar. You shall put your hand in and you won't be dying of snakes, and you shall do this and do that. So people like cessationists, actually, some of them like to say that was the lost ending of Mark and isn't part of the Bible because it's too supernatural. It's too much basically, and it sounds more like 2nd century Christian stories. And so I don't know if you'd ever thought about that with relation to the lost ending of Mark, because it does sound a bit like slightly out from some of the other restrained passages.
So what do they say about the woman caught in adultery in John 8?
Well, because that's not the same thing, so they'll do an argument for why it should be in.
Oh, okay.
So even N.T. Wright, I said this. N.T. Wright was basically umming and ahhing about that. Well, we don't really know. It could have been in, even though it's not in things and it's in different places and jumped into Luke. There was something fuzzy going on about it, but it sounds too Jesus-like to get rid of. The snakes thing, well, that's only the Appalachian snake handlers, so we can jettison that. So it depends which part of the Bible you want to get rid of. so sorry, I don't mean to be a joke on that. But,
well, we've wandered about, and I think we've got to the end of the end of the road.
Yeah,
I think so.
We have.
Yep.
We have.
Yep.
I did want to mention, Francis, about the coincidence miracle that we had.
Oh, I was thinking about that and how we should have mentioned it.
We should have mentioned it, and we will mention it, because this sort of thing has happened to me several times in my life, and it goes back to the beginning of our summer miracles, which was about the more coincidence ones, which people attribute to Jesus and God. And I've had them happen to me, and there's no rhyme nor reason or benefit from it apart from, wow, this is amazing. But I took, well, how long was it ago, Francis?
Oh, gosh, it was more than a couple of years, wasn't it?
More than a couple of years.
It was roundabout when we were going to start doing this, isn't that right? That we would talk early stages of talking about developing this.
Yes,
podcast.
we were still doing our normal meetings up in the city.
Yeah,
but this was talking about this. Well, I had a friend. I had left my work to go to a new job, and I had a friend who said they could meet me just to catch up. And so I'd never been to that part of, I've lived in Southeast London for 30 years, but I'd never, ever, ever been there to that train station or to park near there in all of that time. Never been, so I've got no reason to go to that part of London ever. And so, but the idea was that that's where they lived. And so I went there. And I was waiting in the, or what was it? And now talk about, I would never write a gospel. Sainsbury's. See, if I was writing a gospel, I would have put Tesco's, you see. What gospel writer am I?
Tesco's. You're right, it was Tesco's.
Oh, right, there you go. You wouldn't make a good gospel writer either.
Or another way of looking at it, I'm a particularly good gospel writer.
Well, actually, that's true. You're no different than a gospel writer, Francis. That's right. Because right there, we don't know if it's Sainsbury's or Tesco's. But anyway, it was Tesco's, wasn't it?
It was definitely Tesco's.
And there was a particularly narrow point where everyone was coming out. And as I was walking in, I was going to go to the cafe and then wait for my friend. And I walked through this particular narrow bit, and boom, right in front of me, there was Francis. And I went, Francis. And you went, Andrew. Yeah. And I know that's your area, so that makes it 50% more likely. But it's not my area. And I just went for the first time in my life to meet somebody that I was just going to see probably once to catch up, because I'd left work 3 months before. And boom, I met you literally 30 seconds or 15 seconds. I would have missed you because I think you had a hood on or something. But again, that's probably a false memory.
Francis wearing a hoodie.
Now.
Not a hoodie. No, I don't know, but you did. My memory was.
If it was winter, I might have had a hat on or something. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it was a hat. Yeah. Again, no gospel writer would I make. That's right. But anyway, the fact is, it was kind of miraculous in a way, wasn't it? What are the chances? Well, they are there. And it just so happened that of all the people in London and the place that I would just go to once, I've not been since, never been before. And I met you in the entrance of Tesco's just at the point where you were coming through the very narrow way.
Yep.
incredible. That bit we do remember, yeah?
Yes,
And
yes.
what's the point of that? As a Christian, I could go back on Monday and say, oh, the Lord, I said something to Francis because it blessed her, because she was going through a bad time. You could have all this stuff.
Yeah.
But actually, there was no rhyme nor reason to it apart from, wow.
It was just dumb coincidence. Wasn't
Yeah,
it?
and
it was extraordinary. It was.
It makes you think what's the misses though.
Yeah.
As in, how many times in fact our paths might have crossed, Francis, in London over the last 30 years, and we didn't even know each other.
Yeah.
And if you could go back and you could say, well, you were sitting in a cafe and she was 3 things down with a friend, we'd never know that, and it means nothing. But anyway, that just shows you how a secular, what to me was a completely secular coincidence, but actually it's pretty amazing. And at the same time. So that's, I don't know what you'd think about that, Ed, but it happened. So
I'm convinced.
You convinced it happened. Yeah, that's right. But there you go. But it's the word you put to it, isn't it? So I think Allah was behind it all, personally. But there you go. Or Zeus.
No, it's Richard Dawkins was behind it.
Yes, fair enough.
Yes. Thank Dawkins.
Statistics for maths. Okay, well, we are at the end of this show. It's been quite long, but very, very enjoyable for me to do and to sort of reflect on some of these issues. And we're all on a journey. We're all, I think, trying to understand and make sense of the world around us. And that's really what we're doing. We're trying to make sense of the world at this point where we are. So, Ed, if you just want to clarify what we're doing for the Summer of Miracles Part 3, just in the sum. I know you did it at the beginning, but just as a refresher.
Well, Robert White reached out to us, and we're absolutely delighted that he wants to be a guest, and we're hoping that will all come together for the next episode.
We're very excited at that prospect.
We are indeed.
Should be good.
For Miracle number 3. I have been Andrew, your host.
I'm Ed.
And I'm Francis.